European finance ministers have met in Brussels to discuss setting up a blacklist of global tax havens. The move is a further bid to fight tax avoidance. Certainly, talks on a blacklist, initially planned for December, were brought forward by the EU ministers after media reports citing the Paradise Papers. The papers are a trove of financial reports leaked mostly from Appleby, which is a prominent offshore law firm. Though legal in many circumstances, the papers have dragged in famous names ranging from Britain's Queen Elizabeth to four-time Formula One champion Lewis Hamilton. Well, the documents were obtained by Germany's Süddeutsche Zeitung newspaper and shared with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and some media outlets.
This Dutch scheme is prohibited under rules we have adopted. They should be applied as soon as possible. That's my message.
More has already happened to counter tax avoidance in Europe than anywhere else in the world. We are all working on implementing this together with the Netherlands, and we need consensus there. All member states must be in agreement. We've already made lots of progress in the recent years as we've adopted new directives, and we will all work together on them.
We know that there is a cooperation among states to have more information and more transparency. But states have to stick to their commitments. And if states do not stick to their commitments, we have to put sanctions on those states.
Well, Jack Parrock now joins us in Brussels with more on this. Jack, welcome to the show as always. Now, we've seen EU finance ministers vowing to take action on tax evasion or tax avoidance. How exactly will we see this feature in the upcoming EU legislation?
Well, that's really the question. How far will they go on this? This issue has been really pressed now since the release of these Paradise Papers a couple of days ago, when this originally, the meeting of EU finance ministers here in Brussels today, wasn't really about this, but because of the contemporaneous nature of it, it's been put firmly front and square on the agenda for these finance ministers. And basically what they're discussing is this so-called blacklist that they're putting together of countries that the European Union will deem to be tax havens. There are national lists in the 28 EU member states, but many of them are considered to be toothless. And there's an OECD list, but on that list is only Trinidad and Tobago, and really it doesn't have that much weight. The EU wants to take the lead on this to become the leader in trying to tackle tax havens around the world.
Well, Jack, what exactly happens to these countries that are going to be on this so-called blacklist?
That's the fight. The French finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, is saying the countries need to be sanctioned. If they put together a list and countries don't abide by the rules of that list, so continue to allow investments that are deemed to be sort of evasive of tax, then those countries or those individuals or whoever's involved needs to be sanctioned. Meaning, for instance, the French proposal is perhaps to prevent access to funding at the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, etc., for the tax haven and also potentially for the investor. That needs a unanimous support here in Brussels, though. And at the moment, there are other member states that aren't so keen on that proposal.
And Jack, now we know the issue of tax avoidance in the EU, it was already somewhat politically contentious. We saw some smaller states reluctant to come down hard on those multinationals like Apple. Have these papers changed anything in terms of the attitude towards coming down hard on tax avoidance?
Well, we'll have to wait and see, and specifically how the legislation forms itself on whether it has really managed to swing member states to do more. But certainly it has highlighted it. Now, those smaller member states that you mentioned, Uche, Luxembourg, for instance, and Malta, are frequently accused themselves of being tax havens, of places where big multinational firms can park their money and set up a HQ in order to avoid tax in the rest of the European Union or for other nations as well. They vehemently and regularly deny that claim, those countries. But what's interesting is that on the blacklist that the EU is starting to put together, it wouldn't be possible to put EU member states on that list, like Luxembourg and Malta, if it were to be deemed that they were helping firms dodge tax. And so that's raising question about the credibility of the list, even if it were put together. At the moment, the European Union is screening around 50 countries to decide whether they are in breach of the EU's tax rules on this issue. That list is likely to be less, and as I say, it's all coming to a head. There will be a meeting of EU finance ministers in December, and that's when we'll find out exactly how far they go on this blacklist issue that they've been discussing here today.
Well, we'll certainly be waiting for that. Many thanks, Jack, for those insights. Jack Parrock joining us there in Belgium.